Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon, testimonies from reverts and converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. Please subscribe and please tell people about this channel so that they can get in touch and share their Catholic Christian testimonies. This week's guest is Nikki Monacelli. I'm going to get right into it, Nikki. I saw what you wrote to me. You brilliantly summarized your journey when you emailed me. And what I loved was it was so succinct, which then enables us to really dig in, kind of open it up. I like to go into testimonies not knowing too much. But first of all, thank you for being here and welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Can you take us to the beginning of your journey, your childhood?
Oh my gosh. So if I was thinking about this when I was walking to Mass, what would be the title? And I would say Jewish Atheist to Jewish Catholic. I think that like summarizes it. So I'm Jewish. I mean, I'm Jewish. I was raised in the faith. My paternal grandmother knew God. Obviously, she still does because I know where she is. I just know she's the only one in my family that actually knew who our Father was, right? Everyone else, and I don't know how they came to this conclusion, whether it was like the 50s and the intellectual enlightenment, I don't know what was going on, but I was raised as an atheist in a Jewish family. Because there was no sense in God, I would go to synagogue and they would, I don't know, I learned Hebrew, but it's like the transliteration of these prayers. And I would go to synagogue and we would like say these syllables and it meant nothing to me, right? But I'm told that this God, which I didn't understand, it was a concept to me, not explained, but this God thing was there. And that's why we're going. But that's about all I understood because no one really explained what God was. No, they did. It was an idea that was not true. That's what I knew about God. And so religion was just ridiculous. And that was my experience too, because I was like, you know how some people speak in tongues?
Yeah.
And, okay. That's what it was like to me. It was just like, not true
Gibberish.
tongues, but you know.
Yeah.
And I've been through that too. So that's what it was like. And so atheism made a lot more sense. I mean, you can see it, you can measure it, right? You can measure materialistic,
Sure.
naturalistic atheism. That science was my God, but I didn't know it at the time. So that's just what made sense to me. That's what I came out of. And I was an atheist for 54 years.
What? Okay, that part I didn't know. 54 years. Okay, now, when going through teenage years, 20s, 30s, did the term atheist, did the meaning change for you? In other words, did you go through different seasons of atheism? Because I know that so for example, I've interviewed those that say I was a nihilist in addition to being in the proper sense, atheist. Do you remember different seasons, or would you just say, I was the same all the way through and it's pretty much all I knew?
Well, it was pretty much all I knew. But people go through seasons, they go through emotional seasons. So I'm sure it changed. It got more bitter and skeptical.
Okay.
Oh yeah, by the end I was a total nihilist. I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Would you
And
say logical conclusion in atheism with the way you just said that?
yeah, yeah. And then I looked over the moral abyss and I got into moral relativism because as you age, you naturally ask the big questions in life. Everyone does.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care if you're an alcoholic or strung out on drugs. When you get to the certain point where these questions, like they just come up in your spirit as a human being, and you can try to drown them out, but that's just our natural progression as we age. I'm convinced of that. So I got to the point where I'm looking over the cliff and I was like, oh, moral relativism. And then I looked over the abyss. I'm like, wait a minute. If everything is relative, then, you know, pedophilia is okay. And, it's just like, wait a minute. So for me, it's the moral argument, I think. And I began to question that, but I didn't have the answers. Those questions were still there. But that was like I guess the beginning, like the crack. It's like,
Yeah.
wait, this doesn't make sense.
So the moral law, the moral code, something that is fixed. Do you, I'm assuming you did research when you were an atheist. Did you pursue videos that would talk that would confirm your worldview or anything like that, or you were just kind of on your own?
yeah, I was on my own.
Yeah,
As an
because
atheist. Oh, I used to watch. Okay, this is so funny because I used to watch the Atheist Experience with Matt Dill. And
Dillahunty.
they had at one point they had Ray Comfort on, and the Banana Man. Oh my gosh, I was on my front porch laughing at him, and just like, oh, agreeing with the atheists, and they're from Austin. I went to school in Austin, so I knew they had to be right for some reason. And then afterwards, I listened to the same show, right? And it's just crazy how to see the differences it was like cognitive dissonance listening to it from this new perspective. And this is my conclusion that the only thing that changed was the enlightenment of the Holy Spirit, because I had been like, he leads us to all truth, and I couldn't see what I couldn't see. I didn't know I
Yeah.
was blind,
Yeah.
right? I didn't know I was blind.
Far as 54 years as an atheist, did you internally believe, hey, I'm a good person through much of that? Did you think about whether or not, okay, go ahead. What was that? You said,
Of
of course.
course I was a good person.
Yeah.
I was the best. I was doing all this, good for, at least I thought I was, but good for society. I was doing a lot of volunteer work. Uh, um, yeah, and my career was centered on, human services and helping people. So, yeah, but I didn't see my own faults. But yeah, I thought I was a really good person, better than most, I guess.
Was what was there, were there friends, family members that were accompanying you in this worldview?
I think my family for sure. I had a few friends who kind of thought there might be a God. They didn't have a formal sense. Like, I didn't have anyone religious in my life who definitely knew this is God, this is who he is. I know specifically. It was more of an amorphous concept. So I never really talked to anyone who knew who God was or what God was, or, could explain it to me. I hear a lot of people say, everyone knows the gospel and they're just rejecting it. Well, I didn't know the gospel. I knew that it existed. I knew that the ontology was out there, but the epistemology, no one had explained it to me. And I grew up in the Bible Belt. So they say, oh, you grew up in the Bible Belt, you knew the gospel. And this is where Protestants, I think, maybe get it wrong. Oh, everyone should know the gospel, and if they reject it, then there's a problem. But I don't think we know the gospel. I didn't. Like, maybe I wasn't ready to hear it, but I don't think anyone ever explained it to me. Maybe I wouldn't have been open to it, but I think that everything God's timing, right? He hit me with the gospel at the right time in my life.
Well, the other part of that is there are people that I've known that they reject it, what they think whoever the person is in front of them is saying the gospel is. They reject that, and years later they accept it.
Right.
Someone presents it in a different way, let's say. So yeah, I don't think you can do a black and white analysis for that. Anyway, so the Holy Spirit, I like where we're going with this. This is really cool. So what was that like? Do you remember a moment where, like, you did say the crack was related to the moral relativism?
Right.
Was there a moment where you said, okay, there is a crack, I need to pick up a Bible, or I feel drawn towards going to a church? What was that like?
Okay. So in 2017, I got very, very ill. I was hospitalized. I couldn't move. And I had this friend who visited me every day in the hospital. And she would tell me her pastor was Jewish. So I thought this woman was insane, right? There's no Christian. So she bought me this Bible, and I still have it. It's my very first Bible. It's a Tree of Life Bible. It was written from the Messianic perspective, and she brought it to me. She said, "My pastor said you should have this." I'm like, "Oh, thank you." She said, "We're praying for you," and I'm in the hospital dying as an atheist. I had pancreatic cancer. My MS was out of control. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. Transient paralysis. And so she would say, "We're praying for you." I'm like, "Oh, don't do that. Like, I'm going to die an atheist. Don't just like forget it." She goes, "Well, I'm going to leave the Bible for you." And I told her, "Yeah, I'll read it." That no, but there was something that happened in the hospital. I remember these visions that I had and this peace that I had never, Eddie, I had never experienced peace like this. Like, even if I died, I was okay with it. It was weird. And then I would just like get these senses that Jesus is with you. I'm like, where is that coming from? It's crazy. So some things happened in the hospital, like I had pancreatic cancer, and then one day it's there, and the next day it's gone. And that was weird. Um, my MS was no longer on my brain scan. Like I had plaque a month before, no, a year before, sorry. And then they repeated the MRI, and there's like nothing there. And I didn't know a whole lot about MS, but I had never heard of anyone like getting like it disappearing. And the pancreatic cancer, what do I know about cancer? I don't know. I didn't know if it could disappear, if that was normal. When they told me I didn't have cancer, I'm like, okay, good. Like an Auschwitz victim, let's just move on with our lives, right?
Mm.
Don't think about it. And then someone pointed out to me, that's really weird. That cancer just doesn't disappear. In the interim, I picked up the phone, and it's so weird. I felt like I was under some kind of influence doing this, because I picked up the phone and I called my Christian friend and said, "Okay, take me to church." Like, why would I do that? She does. She shows up on Sunday, and she's been like praying, and she's so excited. And I walked into that church, and I don't know. It's like, okay, how do I become Christian? It was just the weirdest thing. And the only thing I can say is I felt the movement of the Holy Spirit, which I know now, but I didn't know at the time. It was just like I walked into that sanctuary, and I looked around and was like, God is here. And I didn't know how I knew that, but I knew. And so that's when I began to start studying the scriptures intensely. That's all I wanted to read. All the other books, and I was a big reader all my life, all the other books went away, and I just read scripture for over 5 years. That's pretty much, I mean, I would do study in science and stuff. But my thirst was for scripture because I was so dry. Um, and so that's how it started. If that explains anything.
That certainly does. What denomination were you attending?
Well, I would have to say, some blend of Messianic, Pentecostal. There was a lot of weird stuff, but what I know is that no, the pastor asked me to become his assistant. And so he was from Puerto Rico, from a Jewish family, very young, very brilliant, very talented with the gifts, had developed his gifts very well. I learned from him. I studied Torah under him. We did the whole Torah cycle. And then I really needed to dig into the New Testament, but there was no Bible study for that. So I kind of had to do that on my own. And as I grew, I needed to see the connection between, like, as a Jew, I have to know that it's Yeshua, right? I have to know he's our Messiah. And so that's how God put me in this whole thing. He's like, I'm going to educate you first, so you are sure that I am your Messiah, and then we'll move on. And so that's what he's done. But once he takes you through seasons, and once I got through that season, I'm like, this is not the place I'm supposed to be. And I don't know where it is, but it's not in Protestantism. I saw too many, when I studied the scriptures, it was just like, I'm not getting the answers. This is not making sense.
Can you give me an example of what was not making sense and what year this was that you started to have that realization? I mean, if you were saying you were in the scriptures for 5 years, this was not too long ago.
No.
Yeah.
No. So it was Hebrews 10, like 27 through 29. Oh my gosh, I asked almost every denomination I could to explain the scripture, and it didn't reconcile. I got some weird answers, but in my spirit, I'm like, that is not it. Also, the parts that really deal with purgatory, not in the Deuterocanon, but
Sure. Corinthians, right?
Yeah. And that always, like, the explanations are just not right. They're not right. They're not fitting. That's not right. It doesn't make, not only does it not make logical sense, it's not common sense. Like, this is not how the world works. I know God by this point. This is not, no, I just knew, right? And it's like, I don't know where the right answers are.
What was Hebrews? Did you say Hebrews 10? I can't, off the top of my head, I don't remember.
Yeah, I got my dedicator.
Awesome.
Look it up.
Love it.
I should get it on my phone, right? But okay, here. How much worse? So this is 29. How much worse punishment do you think will be deserved by the man who has spurned the Son of God and profaned the blood of the covenant by which he was sacrificed, and outraged the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, vengeance is mine. Again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. So the issue is what happens. And if you spurn it, can you lose your salvation? First of all, the whole thing, if you read the whole thing from a Protestant perspective, and not even one that's doesn't believe in once saved, always saved.
Sure.
It doesn't, the whole passage did not fit for me. And then the Corinthians passage as well. It's like, there's something else going on and I'm missing it.
Did you already have a knowledge, even a cursory knowledge, of the Orthodox faith or the Catholic faith while you were going through the Bible? Or did you just say, logically, something is not squaring?
Yep. No, they tried to teach me about Catholicism, and they said, this is wrong and this is wrong. I'm like, I don't know that. Like, why are you telling me that? I've never done the research.
Wow.
That sounds very bigoted and hypocritical.
Wow.
Why are you telling me this? This is not how it works. Is this how we do it? From atheism, I had to open my mind, say I could be wrong, and then see, you do your research. The scientific method says we can keep the null hypothesis, right? So we have to allow for the possibility that we could be wrong. That's what the null hypothesis is, right? In any research, and this is where atheism did not make sense to me. They're like, okay, let's see if God exists. Okay, that's the question, right? The null hypothesis. So if your hypothesis is God does not exist, the null hypothesis is God does exist. Well, that's not what atheism does, right? Atheism presumes that God does not exist. And so if we ask the question, does God exist? They answer it with no. They don't do the research. That's not humility. Truth requires humility to seek after it. And you look for answers to questions. You don't assert answers.
Well, sorry, go ahead and finish. Sorry.
No, please.
What I find, I guess, insincere in any camp that says the burden of proof is not on me, it's always on the other person. They could never prove to me. So this is what happens when the Catholic faith, you're trying to defend the faith, and you have someone that just says, not satisfied. No, I don't believe it. Show me in Scripture. You show them in Scripture. Not satisfied. That's not what it means. But you could play that at any point. You could always fall back on the burden of proof remains in your hands. It's always on you, and I need to be convinced. It becomes a power play where there is a lack of, I guess, respect, a lack of research, a lack of openness, a lack of humility. But go ahead.
And a lack of effort.
Yeah.
That's just not only intellectually dishonest, but extremely lazy. Like if you're searching after truth, I'm searching after truth. I'm not going to rely on someone else to give it to me. That's lazy thinking. And this was way too important. This is like the most important thing once I got into it. I'm like, So I wanted to find out if that's true, but okay. I say intellectual laziness. I'm not the most unlazy person. So what I know is that prayer works. And so I was drawn to all these Marian statues all of a sudden. It was weird. And I'd stand in front of them and look at her. And there was something going on. So I met someone online who was definitely Catholic. And I said, okay, look, just can you pray to Mary for me? Don't tell anyone, but pray to Mary for me. And within 2 weeks, I was visiting Catholic churches, going to mass, praying the rosary. It was weird. I mean, it was like, not to be irreverent, but it was like Jesus's mom was going, come here, let me show you your son. Let me lead you home. This is not, you're done. Let's come with me. A very Jewish mother. And she just took me under her wing and led me back home and showed me stuff and then gave me the resources to study the faith. I mean, I didn't, just like in atheism, I don't take anything at face value. I do have to study. And so I put a lot of effort into that. And then realized, oh my gosh, this is true. This is true. So I was led, but I don't know, Eddie, every day I get down on my knees at night and just thank God I'm Catholic, because the graces that I've been given that are in the church, that are in the sacraments, and what it's done to my life, and how it's true Christianity. I can't even put it in words. I'm just so overwhelmed and so grateful. So it's been I say it's been a long journey. It really hasn't, but it's been an interesting journey. And I'm hoping that my Protestant friends can see that change. I don't know if they can see the fruit. I don't know if they're open to it. I wouldn't have been. I don't think I was that sensitive to Catholics who we're kind of quiet sometimes.
Yeah.
And we, it's like an algorithm. We have them on YouTube, but in life, even before we had social media, that algorithm is our bias already. So we don't even need the algorithm anymore. We had that before. We would say that's just not true. That's how it worked. And so anything that was true that came from the Catholic faith, it was automatically rejected. But here I am. So
Was that last year that you came into the church?
Yeah. And what's weird is that as I grow in I mean, the theology just makes sense to me. Like I can explain this to people who've been in the faith for a while, who weren't well catechized. And I think that's the beauty of being, and you've talked to so many converts, right? We're on fire for the Catholic faith. We see its beauty in ways that I think many people who walk away from the faith or who are born into it may miss. I mean, I'm finding that to be a little bit true. I think maybe I haven't met a lot of Catholics who are just on fire for the faith, maybe because I'm so new to it. But that's what I like about the converts, is that they keep me on fire, and I have that fire because the faith is just so amazingly beautiful. It's just, and then we have the Eucharist. And then we have the Eucharist.
So beautiful. Yeah, I've heard a number of cradle Catholics say, boy, do we love our converts that come in and reignite people in the faith. And I feel that a lot of the converts admit there's that period where they're overzealous and then they calm down in a sense, but they're still amped up, but maybe they don't come across so maybe directly. Maybe they temper that a little bit, which is fantastic. And I think God is so patient with all of us. Just, boy, this kid just thinks he knows it all, and he's got to be humbled at every stage, no matter what church or whatever part of the journey that you were on. I'm sure that you had to have those moments where you're saying, okay, I need to step back a little bit, or I need additional help.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, and that's continual, because for 54 years that intellectual pride was built up, and so we're blinded by pride, and I still am. I don't, and I just like give it to him, because I can't even see my blind spot. So I am who I am. I'm going to come across as prideful, but he meets me there and he'll go, hey, let's change it. So yeah, I'm as prideful as I am right now, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And he's going to use it and he's going to change it. And so I'm comfortable with my own pride. I don't necessarily like it. It's kind of ugly, but all I can do is be open to him changing it and asking him, Padre Pio, St. Pio, pray, hope, and don't worry, right? And you got to be yourself. Because if you're not, and you're trying to hide it or pretend, you're blocking him from working. You have to be honest. You have to be yourself. You have to, or else, first of all, you're going to be anxious the whole time and trying to hide things. So that's the blessing of Catholicism. It's like I can finally be myself. I could not in Protestantism, and really in atheism, it was even worse. In Judaism, I don't know what that was. Now I do.
Sure. Yeah. And you wouldn't even be aware of your pride had God's grace not been bestowed upon you. So when you're saying like, I'm comfortable with where I am, you only know what you know because it's what he has revealed to you, and you just keep walking. Hopefully we keep learning. Hopefully we keep shedding some of these imperfections. So yeah, that's really good. What was your motivation for living for 54 years?
Yeah, that's a dark question. I didn't really, what was my motivation? Just pure white knuckle survival. I didn't really have, it was an achievement, but there was no joy. There was no, being a nihilist. What's the meaning? What's the purpose? You're just here. It's random. And that got boring. Eventually it got, okay, there's nothing here. Why? What's the point? I'm just in pain, physically, mentally, emotionally. So I had to find something beyond that. Like, otherwise, It wasn't going to be good. It was getting really dark. And no one else had the answer either. What are we doing? Just hanging around waiting to die?
Yeah.
That's what it became. I'm like, I don't want to know. Either I'm going to live or I'm not. And so I have to find, it's like to be or not to be. Let's just go there for a moment. And it wasn't necessarily about suicide. It was more about meaning, right? It was more about meaning because I just never believed to my core, even whether I said it or not, that life is meaningless.
Mm.
But atheism says life is meaningless at its core. And that's just not, obviously, that's just not true. We don't act as it, we don't live that. And I knew that there had to be more. So,
Did you, when you would think of death, what, that's a natural thing. What kind of emotions would you feel? I know, another dark question, but
well, confusion, because you can't, I mean, I knew at 2.5 years old that you just don't die. I knew it. I remember we lived in California and there were blackberry bushes by our fence. And I remember standing there with my dad picking blackberries and I heard the sound of a car go by. I'm like, Dad, when I'm dead, will I hear? And he said, oh, no, you won't have hearing anymore. I thought about that. And I looked up and I saw the beautiful sun. I'm like, well, Dad, surely when I'm dead, I'll see, won't I? He said, oh, no, you won't see. I'm like, will I be able to taste blackberries? No. I'm like, I could not imagine that. And so my dad explained it to me later. That's because you're only 3. You can't, you're not smart enough. But, children know, right? There's no way. I mean, children are like believe in silly stuff, but that was like a deep truth at that moment. And I never forgot it, obviously. So I knew at a very early age that that couldn't be true, but, and that stayed with me. So I think that guided me at that point.
so that's
So I knew,
fascinating to have. Go ahead, finish that thought.
no, I mean, I just knew that, in my soul, now I know it's my soul, but I didn't know what it was, that could not be true, that we are eternal. I mean, even with vampire stories, right? The reason that I think people are attracted to this, I'm sure you've talked about that, is that lack of supernatural, that lack of
Yes.
mystical. And so this sense of eternally living is extremely powerful by the blood. But even in the vampire movies, they get tired of being eternal. I'm like, well, I want to be eternal. Maybe if a alien lands and takes me off to their world, I'll be eternal and live for it. Just anything, like
Yes.
anything to keep living. So we know that. I knew that. And
But
I sought after that. I don't know. I kept on, that question was always in mind. So,
but what you're admitting is so fascinating because you just said, I knew it. I knew it. And then you have the intellectual pride that basically shoves that down to nothing. I mean, it's so many layers down, it's practically gone, I'm sure. And then you have to rediscover that through God opening your eyes, of course. It's just amazing what you can stifle and then say somewhere inside life has meaning, but on the surface you're saying I don't believe life does have meaning. I'm the way you're living and speaking and professing your worldview. It's very interesting.
well, I had help, and Satan still serves God, right? And so, life pounds you down. I had the advantage of being ground down. I
Hmm.
didn't have to, and that was very helpful, or else I wouldn't have gotten there. So everything was removed. God allowed it, right? And then when your life gets, when you hit bottom at some point, you look up. And so Satan serves God still. He's on that chain and it's used. And so I got down to the bottom and I looked up and there he was. And so that happens to a lot of us. A lot of us. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't, joyful, but that's what life got me. And so whatever suffering I went through, I am so grateful for it, because this is where it's brought me. And I don't care if it was a lifetime of suffering, but a lot of people go through that. A
Yes.
lot of people that I've talked to, and I really understand suffering and its salvific purpose for sure. And I'm so grateful. And it allows me to endure more and more and more. So yeah, don't take my suffering away from me ever, because there's so much grace and blessings in there, and I feel so close to him.
Well,
Do you know?
that's so important to say. Thank you for saying that. And the beauty of it is you can also take that suffering and, as we say in the Catholic faith, offer that up and think
Mhm.
of the other souls that are living the way that you were for 54 years, and think of them who need to have their eyes opened. I mean, that's been
Mhm.
a prayer. I don't fully understand it, but it's like whatever I'm dealing with, if there's suffering involved, you just say, God, can you use this in some way, please, for
Mhm.
these people I love, for the audience, whatever. Just, I know that you can use it. It's not it's not for nothing, is what I'm trying to say.
Nothing's wasted. He picked up those crumbs from the basket, so nothing is ever wasted.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm so grateful to Our Lady, because she can take that. I don't know. I mean, she's got that office. I don't know what to do with all the suffering. She does. So I'm like, Mother, you're here. You take all this, you distribute it wherever it needs to go. It's all yours. You'll know what to do. And so I have so much peace about that, because like I just offer it up. Even my little shoulder injury, I'm like, here you go. I don't know how you're going to use it. I know you're going to use it. You're star of the sea. You can use it for purgatory. You can use it. It's just a good business deal, right? My suffering goes to her. She knows what to do with it. So it's a product of life that they can use as fruit. Yay.
Yeah.
I'm happy. So whatever, I mean, that's what gives me peace. No one likes suffering, no one,
No.
but it's not lost. And this is the big difference between atheism. I'm sure you've heard the suffering has no purpose. So what's the point of suffering? You asked me, like, when it got dark, what was the meaning? I'm not sure what exactly how you phrased the question, but when there is no point to suffering, suffering is just pure pain. There is no point to it. Why would you want to go through it? But when it has meaning and purpose, yeah, that's a whole different thing.
So then you're going to say, no kidding, Eddie, but so then if the suffering has no purpose in your mind, are you just perpetually looking for comfort? Would you say that is true?
Mhm.
And comfort often comes in the form, again, I don't know your story, but often comes in the form of vice, and vice clouds the judgment. And you get further and further, as you were alluding to earlier, blinder and blinder. And
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear. I mean, he talks about this with Pharaoh's hardening of the heart. That's sin. Sin darkens our intellect and weakens our will. And so once you're in that, you don't know it's sin. I didn't think sin existed. I don't know what that is. It was a foreign concept. But that's what was happening. I was in this cycle. So, and then you add suffering into the mix and you just running towards vice. What else is there?
yeah,
There's not, I mean, yeah, you can do some good. You can do some volunteer work and maybe that'll lift it, because that's true. I mean, grace comes into that. Grace, not so much with sin, although, when sin abounds, grace abounds more, but you have to have a capacity to take it in. Like if your grace receptor is broken,
Yes.
you're not going to receive it. So I didn't have a grace receptor. It was just, he was there and putting it in as much as possible, but most of it I couldn't receive. So yeah, you run device, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so then eventually you'll be crushed. You know, if you don't have a lot going on in your life, and it kept on getting worse and worse for me.
Yeah.
And that happens to a lot of people. But everybody's bottom is a little different. I don't know what brings other people to faith. I've listened, and I'm just so amazed by the diversity of testimonies. That's why I love watching the testimonies. It's because God does something different in everybody's life, and it's so beautiful. But there are principles that are the same for each of us, and obviously that's God's grace and mercy, but he meets us in very interesting ways. And so I think he gave me a really good testimony to, I don't know, to give hope. I hope.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh yeah. It's giving me
And
a ton of hope for a lot of
I mean,
people.
it's just, I would, it's the years of Eucharistic revival, but I'm telling you, the sacraments, if I can speak, I mean, I just encourage everyone to really embrace the sacraments. And I'm sure most of your audience does, obviously, but for anyone who's listening, who's a nominal Catholic or doesn't really get the sacraments, just go, and he'll teach you, he'll show you, and they work. I mean, I've never experienced progress like this spiritually, and it's just because I'm putting myself in his presence. That's pretty much all I'm doing, and he's doing the rest. Maybe it's different as I guess I'm just very new to the faith, right? But the sacraments are just so powerful and efficacious to growing the faith, and so I don't really have to do that much heavy lifting anymore. Just like, read the scriptures, do a rosary, pray, super easy.
Stay close. Yeah.
So my life was not easy before. And I'm so grateful that he showed me a different way. And that's all I can say. I mean, he gave me an amazing testimony. He gave me the ability to help people, which is what I've always wanted. Truly, truly help them, pray for them, love them in a way that I could never love before. It's just, I don't know. I don't have the words. I'm just so grateful.
I love it. I love it. The other thought is for those that may come from a background similar to yours, from an atheistic background, let's say, back to that theme of suffering. Okay. If you think of this moral code and you reason that, hey, that is ridiculous. That's tough. What's wrong with these nutcases that follow these rules, these regulations? That's got to lead to some torment and suffering, all that stuff. I think I'll go over here, like I was saying about the vice, right? Well, not only does it darken the intellect, but guess what it leads to? Suffering, severe suffering. And I believe when you are so caught up in that cycle that you insist that you're not suffering, that's when you start to say that you're proud to be doing certain things. You revel in certain things because would you not want to stifle the fact that you're suffering because you're telling the world, I'm doing the right things. I got to choose. I'm not doing these these ridiculous religious, whatever. I'm not following religion. I'm going to go this route. And if your pride's in the way, why would you ever admit that that road led to destruction and suffering? You would then say, no, similar to what I was saying earlier. You stifle it. And then you say, I'm proud to be doing this. I am so excited. Don't you see how happy I am? And then it's faking smiles, faking joy. I just wish that the message would be, I guess, more and more clear. No, the joy that you're going to find in suffering is when you obey the Lord. And that's true freedom.
Yeah. I hope that, that's what I pray, that especially my coworkers who are very worldly. They're very young. They're into all the woke ideology, the sexual disorder desires, as are a lot of people. But the modern stuff with the transgender ideology, which just breaks my heart. I love the LGBT community. They're just amazing people, but they have been deceived and they're confused, and then they're saying that they're happy, and then I see so much depression and so much confusion, but yet they're powering through. And I remember doing that. And there's such a disconnect between who they are as a person and their soul and then their body.
Yep.
And Abigail Favale talks about this in her book, Genesis of Gender, which I highly recommend to anyone who's really interested in the modern viewpoint on gender, which I don't even like that word, but I see that, and they're forcing themselves to be happy. And if someone's happy or not. And they chase after happiness, but the thing is, happiness is a fruit of righteousness. You can't, if you're gonna live a righteous life, then you're gonna have some happiness, deep joy. I don't even call it happiness, I call it joy. It's just, I don't know, fruit of the spirit. But happiness comes from that, and then you have some blessings. And even if you don't have the material blessings, you're still going to have joy and peace. And I don't see that. They're looking to the world. They're not. It just breaks my heart. So I remember that, thinking that you had to say that you were happy. You had to.
Yeah.
If you said, well, I mean, now you can be crazy on TikTok. They advertise like, this is my specialty. I have DID and I have autism and I have, and that's their happiness, is they can spread their insanity, which is like, where are we? What world is this? It's like some comic book, but this is what they're living in. And all I see is like spinning and craziness. And this is what's taken for happiness, this constant swirl of, I don't know what, but there are, I'm just praying that the Lord will instill in me that joy that can radiate out and be attractive. And so that's what I pray for. And I pray for them to come to the true knowledge of who they are. Admit in their darkest moments, when they're alone, they've got to lay their head on the pillow and cry at some point, right? Because their lives are empty, not because of the sadness, like the loss of something, which is sad, but because they're empty. And that's got to happen, because it happened to me. But I'm not sure why they won't admit it. I think it's just too hard. I think it was hard for me. I mean, to admit that then you have to do something about it. So it's better not to admit it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Once you admit something, not that Oprah's my favorite person, but she said, once you know better, you do better. And that's true. But you have to first admit it, right? So once you know that truth, that you aren't happy truly, then you have to do something about it. And so to admit that you're unhappy in the world, to admit that you're unhappy as an atheist, is almost impossible, because then you have to move forward. So
that's great. Okay, last question. So what I asked before, I said, what was your motivation for living as you were an atheist? Okay. Now, as a Christian, what is your motivation for living?
wow. To love God and to love others. Truly love them.
Yeah.
And as I love God and get to know my family, the saints, God, the church, and the family of man, and I'm just filled with mercy and grace, then I can love in what he's done to my heart, and being able to love people is the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. And I think a lot of that just has to do with taking the sacraments and being in adoration, just being in his presence, just putting, like literally putting my butt down in the chair. Here I am. I'm in your presence. I'm going to sit here. I'm not going to say anything. I'll wait. You tell me what to do. And he fills me, and then I can go out. The mass is ended. Go out. But that's, that's pretty much all I do. And that's my prayer, is that it grows and grows, and I'm able to love people more and know
Yes.
what the next right step is, and just do that. I don't know what it is. Telling my testimony, I guess, is part of it.
It's one of those steps. Absolutely.
But he does do miracles. I did have pancreatic cancer. I did have MS. I don't. MS doesn't just get better.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I tell people that, and I don't know. When I was an atheist and someone told me a miracle, it's like, oh, there's got to be another explanation. You're either crazy, or you're lying, or you don't know what you're talking about. So that's how I justified it. Now that it happened to me, I'm like, uh-oh, none of that's true.
Yeah. There goes that idea. Oh my gosh, Nikki, thank you so much. Really appreciated your testimony.
Thank you.
I will be praying for you and your family.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was wonderful. I hope this helps, and I love your that you take testimonies. It's so helpful.
Great.
And so edifying. So Eddie the Edifier.
Was that you that wrote that?
Mm-hmm.
That was you. I appreciate that. Yes, I do remember that comment. Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and please share it, and please let others know about, or encouraging them to share their stories as well. Until next time, take care and God bless. Bye.